Welcome to the Path Podcast. It's May 1st, 2024. My name is Tani. I'm here with Auk.
Hey, Tani.
Hey, Auk.
It's good to be here with you.
I definitely agree.
Yep. And how are the new shop hours working out for you?
I think the word is still getting out, so I'm glad you brought it up, that we're during pandemic, we started closing at 5, and now we're back open till 6. It's picking up. It's getting busier during those hours, and I've seen the crew sometimes. So I don't want to create any expectations that we can't fulfill, but a lot of times, like if you go into a restaurant and you're there like 10 minutes before close, they're not going to kick you out.
Right.
Sometimes it could be like that in here a little bit, and sometimes we do just have to go.
Right.
Right. But a lot of times we end up here till half an hour to an hour after close, just wrapping everything up and helping the last people and all that. And that's cool too.
Yep. I like it. I get to talk to the couple of the guys here because, we show up and start setting up for the podcast, and shop guys are still here. It's good to see them.
When we were closed at 5, everyone was pretty much gone when we would get here for the podcast. Yeah.
Correct. And so, well, that's good. And is that Saturday and Sunday too, or Saturday and Sunday still close at 5?
Thanks for asking. Saturday and Sunday we do still close at 5.
Okay, great. I have to remember that. So,
but I think the idea is no one's rushing from work on Saturday and Sunday.
True. Yeah, that works out well.
And I'm loving the daylight savings time because now we can, even with closing at 6, we can do rides after work.
Yeah.
It's getting dark at about 7:30,
right.
Maybe even 7:40 now.
Yep. That's pushing.
Yeah.
And on the morning, it's getting lighter earlier. So this morning, I think I walked out of the house at like 5:45, and I was like, could either be in the middle of a round of disc golf, or I could have been in the middle of a ride.
Yeah, I've been trying to ride at least twice a week lately, which is kind of like, I feel like that helps me kind of be okay.
Right.
And this last week I only rode once, and I feel like maybe I'm not totally okay.
It's good I'm benefiting from you riding more. Yep. I think I've ridden with you, a few times. Yeah,
it's been awesome.
Yeah.
We've ridden some rad trails, had some good talks, and enjoyed some good views.
Yep. And should we do shop news before we get into kind of some thoughts on battery life and on the relays?
Yes. We are doing 3 shop rides a week right now. Tuesday morning dawn patrol, Women's Wednesday, and Thursday after work. Mm-hmm. And these are both all 3 of these rides are every other week.
Got it. And
I think the best way to really learn about the rides is to go to our website, thepathbikeshop.com, and click ride in the upper right hand corner, and then click group rides, and you can see what dates they're on and when they're meeting and everything.
There will definitely not be a dawn patrol at 5:45 in the morning. It's a little early. So I think the dawn patrols are 7:45 or something like that. Meeting every other Thursday morning. That's been it's been good. Let's see. What else is going on at the shop? Oh,
well, I mean, news around here that's actually kind of pretty sad is that. Oh, geez. I was trying to pull up some news on my phone and I accidentally started playing.
No worries.
I was trying to see the date for our upcoming bikes and barbecue.
Oh.
And it's on our Instagram is what I was looking at.
Right.
I forgot to put it in my notes for the show.
Right, I haven't seen that.
But it's going to be coming up in June. And I think, I'm pretty sure June. And we're going to meet at the shop, do our old Bikes and Beers loop.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
So it's sort of like Bikes and Beers only, and it's going to end back at the shop, and we're going to do barbecue.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Should be fun.
Should be really fun. At the 649B?
That's true.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'll be good.
I was pretty saddened today to see that the Warrior Society announced they won't be doing any more events.
Right.
or trail work. That's
Yeah.
kind of a big deal.
Yeah. And they've been around for 25 years, 25 plus years.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, there's some key Warrior Society members who are like a big part of kind of my introduction to riding and trail work and just the whole kind of what it means to be a rider, even in a lot of ways, like Keith, for example.
Yeah, I agree.
I hope that we can find a way to continue to have a forum around here for people like that. I'm hopeful that we can.
Right.
But I think now's probably more of the time to just kind of have a moment of silence for what we had.
Yeah.
It's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, no kidding. Same for myself. When I first got into riding, whether it be the trail maintenance events, or they had a series of events throughout the year. So whether it be the Vision Quest and or the Toad Festival, right? Yeah, and even they had like a summer series races for a couple of years.
There was a time when I thought I was going to do the Vision Quest every year till I died, and while that turned out not to be true for me, I think that feeling that way and being part of that doing
community,
those events
right.
and being part of that community at that time had that kind of timeless, legendary feel.
Yeah.
And it was real. I mean, I guess even though I was wrong about the details, I think the truth of the feeling was still true.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, and I think a number of those folks are still here locally riding and doing trail maintenance and the likes.
Yeah.
So a huge thanks to all those folks in the Warrior Societies.
It's an interesting time for stewardship in our area because, you know, when I started mountain biking, I was introduced by kind of my first mountain biking guy, expert buddy, mentor, Duty, right? And he immediately introduced me to the Share Mountain Bike Club,
right?
Which I think it was later that they became the local chapter of IMBA,
right?
But they had been operating in Orange County when I started riding mountain bikes in the early '90s. They already had a long history around here, and they had already won battles that still shape the way mountain biking looks around. In other words, there had been like pretty serious challenges to access for mountain bikers at like Crystal Cove State Park,
right?
In particular, I think that they were able to organize against or organize mountain bikers to keep access,
right?
And also getting that missing link trail built across the back of El Moro that connected
Laguna Wilderness to the El Moro,
and helping get that open.
Yeah, for sure.
And Share recently kind of turned into Orange OCMTBA.
I think so, right?
Right. And so everything's a little bit in flux right now.
Yeah.
Which, try to embrace change, but it's also change is hard.
Well, and you have another organization rising up in that area, the Laguna Wilderness Foundation, Laguna Coast. Right. So they're doing work out there, organizing trail maintenance, what have you.
And that's a group that I think aligns with mountain bikers, but isn't a mountain bike group. Is that true?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, hopefully.
Which I think is cool. I think it's great to organize around more than just our sport to have access and to have good trails and all that.
Perhaps that's part of an evolution for survival of all trail advocacy, multi-use.
Yeah, I think there can be some kind of turf wars and stuff, but I think it's better when we can work together.
Yeah.
Hopefully, and I think in Orange County we actually have overall really, like, if you go travel even just north of us a little bit, sometimes you can encounter culture that is a lot less cooperative between the user groups. As in, when I see a person on a horse or a hiker at, say, Santiago Oaks, which is our most local trail network,
Right.
literally 99 times out of 100, that person waves and smiles back at me and thanks me if I do anything courteous to them, for them.
Right.
And like seems happy to see me out there. And likewise, most of the mountain bikers seem to be doing that towards the other user groups. And when I go ride in the Gabes, a lot of times I'll come around a corner and stop like 10 feet away from someone and smile and say good morning. And they're like, "You're going too fast. You're out of control." It's like, how did I stop? How did I have such a huge margin of safety in how far I stopped from you? If I don't even argue, right? But it's like crazy.
Right.
Like,
Right. I don't know. I feel like the Oaks is a pretty good example of good relations. I don't know about the El Morro area.
I do think that there are more angry hikers in the El Morro area than at Oaks,
Right.
but less than the Sand Gapes.
Sure, I agree with that.
And also more hikers overall than the Sand Gapes, and way more friendly ones. Like,
That is true. That is true.
but yeah, I do think El Morro is probably the most hotly contested
Area here.
because the trails are nice for hiking.
Yeah.
There really are. They're nice hiking trail. There's some good trails. So there's some trails that are just pleasant to hike. Some of them aren't as steep as some of the other Laguna trails, and overlooks the ocean. And that coastal chaparral ecosystem is just really enchanting. And
Right. And I wonder if the fact that a lot of the places where the hikers are, it's the wide open fire roads, and so bikers maybe certain population of bikers don't really slow down, and they're just, even though they're far away, they just come whizzing by, which is,
I'm sure that feels dangerous when riders do that.
Correct. So, yeah. So no, that's I actually enjoy riding in the Oaks and seeing the horses.
And I think to be as generous in perspective as we can, we have to picture people picturing themselves riding our bikes.
Right.
They don't know
Right.
whether or not we are in control of the bike. They know they would or wouldn't be in that situation.
Correct. Correct. Oh man. Let's see.
Did you see that Gwen is going to be announcing for the DH World Cup for the first 4 races?
That'll be interesting.
I think so too. You know, a lot of times when pro riders do this, it sometimes kind of doesn't go over as well.
Right.
And like Pink Bike was pretty hard on Cedric.
Right.
I have a suspicion. You never know, right? But I have a feeling Gwen's gonna nail it. And I like Gwen. I would say I'm a Gwen fan, but you could hear in my voice that like I'm not like a Gwen fan. Like I like him as a person and I like him as a rider. I've met him.
Right.
He's a nice guy.
Right.
Obviously is a tremendous rider, but like he's not my riding hero. Like, or I don't quite know how to put it in a way that doesn't make it sound either too generous to him or not generous enough. Because I honestly, like, he's the guy's the man, right? Like,
right.
but like my riding hero is more Sam Hill. Maybe that helps with perspective, right? Like, or in a modern era, maybe more like a Lucas Shaw.
Right.
Like,
right.
So a slightly different style of rider and just way of going about it. But like, Gwen is a good communicator.
Right. But when I've heard him speak, interviews, podcasts, whatever, I see that, and I think he's going to do a good job.
I might be. How about this? I think I'm a fan of him as a racer. I suspect I might turn out to be even more of a fan of him as an announcer.
Yeah.
And I think when you get the right person with that perspective who can add something to the announcing that can relate.
Right.
Can more relate to the riders.
Right.
When it works awesome. Right.
Right.
So I'm kind of excited about that.
Yeah, and it really feels to me I feel like really close to he could still be competitive.
I think he probably will prove that he can later in the year. He says he plans to race later in the season when he's more recovered from his elbow injury.
Right.
And I would expect him to. I think he'll prove. I think if I had to bet, I think he'll probably prove that he definitely can still compete.
Right.
Can he still dominate? I think the question, in my mind, is more can he still dominate?
Right.
And I think that's more just we'd have to see.
Sure. Yeah, so along those lines, I mean, he's so connected to racing right now.
At his peak, he was really dominant.
Yeah.
Like he didn't not win many races.
Right. Yeah, that's great. So speaking of Gwyn, Crestlines are built up.
Yeah, so Gwyn's a partner there, and we have 2 that you could come to test ride a Crestline in the neighborhood, a size 3 or a size 4.
Right.
The size 4 is 29, the size 3 is mixed wheel.
Right.
They are exquisite. You get a lot of comments like, oh, like if I won the lottery, if I ever had a real F-it moment, like,
right.
This is the one I would do.
Right. Yeah, full power. How big are the batteries on those?
I want to say, well, it's the standard Bosch Smart System, which is 7 something, and I want to say
750.
I think that's right.
Yeah. Because I was just looking at the Norco VLT, which is
pretty sure that's what's in there. I think you can get it also with the 630.
Got it.
And pretty sure they can be had either way. And I think we got the 750s. I have to double check.
I mean, if you're going to go all in on a full power,
more and more, there's a specific set of checkboxes that I see e-bike shoppers shopping for.
Yep.
And we talked about this a little bit. There aren't a lot of bikes that check them all. And the list is, I heard a customer the other day kind of like trying to explain what they're looking for like 10 plus minutes. And I was like, hold on. Bosch, full power, mixed wheel, minimum 170 travel. They're like, yep, that's what I want.
I think there's 2 bikes.
In North American distribution right now that I know of for sure, there's the Crestline and there's the Norco Range VLT. I think maybe High Bike makes one, which is like semi in North American distribution.
Right.
And I think someone commented that the Ibis Oso can be that way, but I think last time I saw the Oso, it had a Shimano motor in it. Maybe there's ones with Bosch motors in them.
Right.
It can be mixed wheel, I think.
Right.
So I told this customer, I was like, hey, if you want to compromise on any one of those things, I have like 4 bikes to show you. If it doesn't have to be Bosch, I have 4 bikes to show you. If it doesn't have to be mixed wheel bikes, I have a few bikes to show you. If it doesn't have to be full enduro, I might have a bike to show you.
If it doesn't have to be full power, I've got a...
If it doesn't have to be full power, like you could try my Relay, BMW. Right. So but anyway, I think that it's kind of this pattern. You pick up on patterns, right?
Right.
It's definitely a pattern that I'm seeing over and over again. Is that's the checklist? Bosch mixed wheel, 170 minimum travel, like they want a Fox 38 or a Zeb,
right?
And it has to be mixed wheel. It has to be Bosch, and it's like, no, like this is what I want. Like,
I wonder why it has to be Bosch.
I think that in the full power realm, if you go do a Google search, what's the best e-bike motor, you're likely to come away with the impression that the answer is Bosch.
Right.
And in fairness, if you like ask Zach at the Path enough questions or Tani at the Path enough questions, we're going to have a little bit more of a nuanced view. Like, for example, I mean, if you ask me, I think that of the major options, Bosch is probably the quietest for full power.
For full power, right.
It's not so quiet that... See, here's where I think it's interesting. For me, it's none of the things are a deal breaker. But if you get someone's honest opinion, you may not understand that none of them are a deal breaker, and you just, well, Bosch is better. So it's like, is Bosch quieter? Yeah, I think Bosch is quieter than the other options. What's the most reliable? Maybe Bosch.
Right.
Probably Bosch.
Right.
Is it way more reliable than Shimano and Yamaha? I don't think so.
Right.
But is it maybe a little more? Maybe. Like, the internet seems to think so, and I think Zach thinks so. Maybe like my like unscientific survey of the bikes we've sold says it's a little more reliable than Shimano. Honestly, just to like counterpoint that a little bit, I'd rather be the customer getting a warranty through Shimano than Bosch, and both companies do have warranties. Shimano's local and all over it.
Sure.
Not that Bosch's customer service is bad, but Shimano's been really on top of that for us.
Yeah.
So there's two categories. I think that most riders really like the intuitive power setting level. What do they call that?
Gosh, I forget. EMTB.
The Yamaha has a similar setting for the Giant motor for Giant.
Yeah.
And people like that too, but I feel like people who have ridden both say, well, I kind of like the Bosch version a little better.
I do remember that, and for sure. It's been a while since I've ridden a Bosch, and I really do like that mode.
I think that compared to the Shimano, the Bosch puts out power at a little bit lower pedaling cadence.
I see.
Which I think is appealing. It's appealing to me. I kind of like the pedaling cadence requirement of Shimano, though, because it gives me that great it really pushes that cardio.
But when you're restarting, or if you're like struggling up a really steep hill, like on Big Bend or something like that.
Yeah, there's time. And honestly, that's not how I ride my normal bike.
Right.
So it doesn't feel as natural to me.
Right. It is helpful on those in those times, though,
to have the high cadence requirement.
To have the lower cadence requirement.
Right. Totally. Yeah. No, and I'm saying yes, and the lower cadence is more how I actually ride my bike in general too. Right. Yeah. So I think that people come in with kind of like Bosch is the best attitude.
Yeah.
And it's hard to argue with them unless the point is, well, it's not the best by much.
Right. And hopefully that's not a deal breaker. Right.
And maybe it's the best, but the other ones are good too.
Right.
Which is kind of, I think, how a lot of bike world people feel is like, no, it's, the Bros, the Shimano, at this point, Bros had a lot of problems at first.
Right.
The Bosch and Yamaha and Shimano, they're all good motors with good systems.
Right.
Most riders who have all of those systems actually have good experiences.
Fazua for a reduced power.
And I think Fazua got a bad reputation early on, and I have more trust in Fazua every day. Like, we are barely seeing any Fazuas in here lately.
Right.
And we have a lot of them out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there were more earlier.
And we're doing a lot of writing on those right now.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's why on the Bosch. And then mixed wheel, I think the word's getting out that if you want an enduro e-bike, it's going to be heavy. It's going to be hard to pick the front wheel up.
Yep.
Mixed wheel might help
a little bit with that.
And also, it's interesting. I was a little surprised just how heavy the Crestline and the Norco are, like 56 to 58 pounds for a pretty nicely spec'd carbon bike.
Yeah. But I guess that's the weight of the big long travel burly enduro e-bikes.
Kind of makes sense.
Yeah. And that's even, I'm looking at the Norco. I keep looking over Tani's shoulder at that Norco Range VLT. It's even with the new RockShox Vivid Air Shock.
Yeah, that thing seems sweet.
Yeah.
High pivot with an idler and like a horse link type thing that they're calling a virtual pivot.
Right. Virtual pivot suspension, high pivot is what I think.
But it's got essentially a chainstay pivot below and in front of the dropout, which to me means horse link.
Correct.
But I guess now that the patent's expired on horse link and VPP, you can use those terms more loosely or more with less regard to patents.
Right. Yeah, it's funny when you and I
trademarks.
This is the first time that I kind of thought about it, but that makes the chainstay, horse link makes the chainstay a really long link.
Right. We were I was trying to wrap my head around why they call it a virtual pivot. And I was thinking about it. I was like, well, they call a virtual pivot bike a virtual pivot because the main pivot isn't the center of a circle.
Right.
And I guess the main pivot isn't the center of a circle. I mean, the main pivot isn't the center of a circle on that bike either. It's just that the link is really, really long.
Right, exactly. That's a good way to think about it. I think it's a good way to think about it. Speaking of Crestlines and the range, especially that Crestline, there is still 18 months no interest.
That's true. Thanks for reminding us on that. That's in-store and online. Synchrony Financial.
Yeah. I mean, it's like a car payment on the Crestline, maybe. Not even
nice car.
Not even close.
It's like almost $1,000 a month.
18 months. No, 18 months. Not 12
but it's
months.
a $13,000 bike.
No, it's like what?
$750 a month.
$750 a month. Okay, it is like a car payment. It's only for 18 months, not for 6 years now.
Yeah. Over the Hump is back in full swing. I checked with Luke and some others, and it sounds like it was kind of like going off. Everyone was stoked. It was a good race yesterday.
Right.
So that's awesome. Next races that will be available after the podcast, May 14th and May 21st. I think a lot of people know, but I think probably some of our listeners don't know that these Over the Hump races are just right here behind Irvine Lake. And easy to get
really
to, easy to participate in. So we've talked about it a lot on the show, but it's been a minute. Like, I highly recommend those races to someone who wants to try racing.
So one of the listener questions, Zach6251, what's it going to take to get Tani and Auk to race Over the Hump?
So we both have. It's been a long time.
Yep.
I think last time I raced Over the Hump, I think I got mid-pack beginner, maybe.
Okay.
Does that sound right? Maybe it was mid-pack sport, but I don't think so.
I think I mid-packed sport.
And I was like tongue hanging out, like hurting.
The last time I think the last time I did it, it took me over a day to get over it, to get back to normal. A day and a half,
Yeah.
So I could still do it. I just don't know if I like to get my head and body into that space.
There is a rumor that Over the Hump is going to do slalom again this fall.
Ooh.
And that would be tempting to me.
Right.
That'd be
Jeff
fun
and
for
I
me.
were close.
Yeah, you guys were.
We were close, but rained out. We were actually talking the day that the day that it was really forecasted to rain, and Jeff and I were texting back and forth saying, like, "Are you going to do this?" I was like, "I'm going to do it as long as it's not rained out." And then it rained out.
Yeah. Bummer. But maybe in the fall we can have the final throwdown.
The three of us, maybe. we won't commit to it yet, but maybe in the fall. And I was going to ride my Kona Hanzo ESD.
Yep. I think my Switchblade would be a good bike for that probably, but I'd have to ride the course to say if I want a hardtail on it or not.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you could break out the black market.
Yeah. I'd put some tall bars on that thing if I did, I think. But I think I'd want some suspension. Seems like there's enough choppiness to maybe make it work.
I see.
And little enough like sprinty pedaling maybe.
Right.
Too.
But another maybe moment of silence, like just looking at my Hanzo ESD the other day in the garage, and man, I was reading that Kona set up at Sea Otter and then unexplainedly tore down.
Right.
And then just wasn't before the Sea Otter kicked off.
Right.
And then we get news that it looks like they might be.
I think Kent International who bought Kona a while back, a couple years ago or so, a year and a half ago maybe, is looking to sell, I think, from what I understand.
Right.
And I did hear a rumor about this that sounds true to me, as in like, oh yeah, I could see that. Like, apparently they announced a couple of new bikes at Sea Otter, and then some upper management maybe had recently come to the realization, didn't know they were going to announce them at Sea Otter, or some group didn't understand another
There's
group.
a miscommunication on it.
And it was basically like, oh no, like, we're probably not going to be able to make those bikes.
Wow.
Like that's the rumor I heard, and I think part of the rumor is that maybe Kona's. I don't want to get too into it, but maybe they have to take some other bikes from their factory first.
Right.
And that maybe that's going to be hard enough as it is.
Right. Sure.
And then I've even heard rumors that maybe that's been a thing with Kona for a while. And there's been times where we couldn't buy the bikes we wanted to buy because we had to sell the ones we had first.
Right,
so I get it. And I think that that's actually a thing at bike companies more than people might realize. I think people think that they see what a bike costs and they're like, man, Kona must be killing it. But I think actually everyone at Kona from the top down always worked pretty hard, and the ownership, I think, did pretty well at the end when they sold.
Right.
But I don't think they were like for founder owners of the size of business that they had, I'm not sure that they were like doing incredibly well. I don't really know their finances, right? But I don't think that. My impression is that it's hard to be in the bike business.
Yeah.
And that there's a lot of challenges, and everything costs more than you think. And
right. And maybe there's only a few higher profile boutique brands that grow and get acquired, and the owners, founders turn it into like really lucrative deals for themselves.
And even then, let's look at when you sell, if you sell to the right people at the right time.
Right. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about.
And even then, it's almost like you have to have like a pandemic level extraordinary event for a lot of them. A lot of people sold around that time just because it was the best business has been for 50 years in the bike industry. Right. So it was a good time to sell. And now that's 2 years old. News is 2 years old, and it's the worst business.
It's the worst time to sell.
It's not
right,
quite
exactly.
True. It is pretty rough.
Exactly. So maybe I'll go try and hunt down my Gen 1 Process 153.
There's a few things about this on my mind. One is the Kona Wawa is truly my favorite pedal that I have personally run. I'm not saying that I haven't tried every flat pedal.
Right.
I've tried a few.
And so are you going to buy stockpile a few sets of those in your garage?
So the potential, I hope that someone continues to make those.
Right.
I think probably someone's going to buy Kona and try to revitalize it, but I think there might be some dark years along the way.
Right.
Kona was our first brand that we picked up was KHS Bicycles.
Ooh, yeah.
And we never really sold many. It was just a bike brand that would let us buy their bikes at dealer cost, because they were also a parts distributor locally.
Right.
And then we started selling Jamis bikes.
Yep, I remember that.
But we were just really small and couldn't do the buy-in for a lot of the bigger brands. And then almost right away we started selling Kona, and Kona's the only brand that's been with us pretty much the whole time.
Yeah,
so it's a pretty big deal for the path. And we have a lot of deep Kona love in the store. I mean, the whole thing where I forget the branding term for when your brand is synonymous with the product, like Scotch tape or
right,
Xerox,
right,
or
right.
In some parts
Kleenex,
some parts of America, Coke is any soda pop,
right.
Kleenex. For a while, there was this bit around the shop that we thought that all bikes were Konas.
Right.
So someone would come in, we'd be talking about in the back, working on a bike, customer brought in their Kona. It's like an Ellsworth. Just means bike.
Right.
And we've had customers that have Kona we have customers that have Kona tattoos. Some customers have a Kona Path 2 and a Path Tattoo, I think. Maybe.
Right.
Pretty deep
that
connection.
Is deep connection. I mean,
so
a decade-long annual ride, decade plus, was named after
Push a Kona.
Kona.
Annual every year for over 10 years, I think.
Right, right.
So hopefully Kona can kind of rise up out of the ashes under maybe Kent can kind of like get through the darkness and sell it to someone who cares about it.
Right.
And who gets it.
Right.
Maybe. Or maybe we'll have to have a moment of silence for Kona on a future podcast. I hope not.
Right.
For right now, it's a moment of solemn reflection for Kona.
Right. I'm keeping that ESD. I was thinking of selling it. I think.
We've talked about, like, there's bikes you just kind of feel a connection to. I think my Kona Kickapoo, my red and white Kickapoo, I wish I still had that.
I know where it's at.
Yeah.
We could retrieve it.
We'll see about that.
I'd like to see you write it down. Oh gosh.
I think I remember one of the first rides I went on, you and I went to Laguna, and I don't remember exactly what trails we wrote it down, but they were not generally that tame.
Yes. Yeah, I think they were on the more extreme side of what you could experience out there.
I got accused of a humble brag on the shop the other day, and I wasn't even trying. It came up.
Right.
Like, there was talk of hardtails and some trails and stuff, and someone was like, wait, Drew was like, wait, you guys rode you're saying you guys rode hardtails down that? That's a pretty serious humble brag. I'm like, didn't really mean it that way, but we did.
Right.
Like,
right.
We didn't ride them how they're ridden now.
Yeah.
And Drew was like, but like whatever.
Yeah.
He's like, that trail it's not how it is now. It was now then, right? I was like, actually, it was kind of more raw. It was narrower and more raw, actually.
Right. Yeah. I mean, to me, yeah, I feel like there are definitely certain, especially the last big feature. I feel like that. Yeah. I feel like that back then was way more raw than it is now.
I think you're right, but it's hard to tell because we're doing it on those bikes. But I think you're right.
Even on those types,
I remember. Yes, I think you're right.
I feel like every time I'd hit that thing at speed, it was I always thought, am I going to make this?
Yeah. And it was hard to not get a lot of speed on it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I saw like a real pro hit that section, and like it was before I had like a downhill bike or like, and you gap into that, right? And like you rip the crap out of that berm at the bottom. Right?
Yeah.
Like,
well, see, that's
like,
yeah. See,
my ride fantasy just changed.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, right now there's a built up left into the berm. I think the line now is there's like a little bit of a left berm before you hit the right at the bottom.
And I think that's the same as back then. And you would bounce off that left berm and just lift over from that left berm. You would pull up over the lip of the drop in and gap into it and get even more speed.
Right.
One time I botched that move and I entered that section without my bike and just landed in the bush like whoa.
Oh, man.
That could have been really bad, but I'm totally fine. Like it was like a bush tree that just kind of caught me.
Oh, right.
I was like just standing.
Oh, gosh. Oh, man.
But also you do lose a lot of, it's like lose a bunch of speed in that hard left berm and then you're just kind of floating and so it wasn't.
Right. Oh, gosh. Oh.
I think my front wheel went over the berm, but my body kept my bike had enough force back on me to get my body into the turn.
Not on that particular portion of that trail. I remember, man, I think it was on the same ride that what was his name? Our dear Russian friend.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I think it was on that same ride that didn't he scorpion and we took him to go ride.
I hope not.
I was like, oh my gosh. Maybe I'm thinking of another guy.
I do remember someone scorpioning on the Ash section.
Yeah.
And I don't think it was
him.
Dennis.
Okay.
I think it was someone else. I don't remember who
it was. Oh my gosh. I remember seeing that. I was thinking, man, I don't know how someone could walk away from that.
Have you ever scorpioned?
No.
I have only once, and I literally, as it was happening, thought I was never going to walk again, right? Like,
man, that's what it looks like. I'm like, oh my gosh. I was like right close.
The trippiest part about it for me was the kind of surprise and shock when my feet hit the back of my helmet. Because honestly, I'm not flexible enough to do that.
That's what I said. So mad. Because this poor guy, he came and touched the ground on the sides of his helmet. I was like, because I had brought my camera. That's right. Okay, no, so it wasn't with Dennis. It was with someone else because I had brought my camera.
Yeah, I remember that event and that ride, and I feel like they were like it was like a friend of a friend from out of town.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh no, I ride the NAR. And we were like, okay, cool, let's go.
Get some pictures and oh my God.
But you know what?
But they got up
and also trying to think about it from that guy's perspective. The time it happened to me, it was on a section of trail I'd ridden a few times and didn't think that much of, and I just messed it up. And the guys who I was with were all kind of a lot better than me of riders,
right?
And I could kind of feel them all like, oh, he's just trying to keep up with us. It's like, no, I ride this. That was just a stupid mistake.
Oh gosh, right. Right. Because that kind of crash doesn't happen often. The scorpion type of crash, I don't know.
I think there's a little bit, but I'm kind of joking, but also too, there might be some survivor bias on that.
Oh,
it might not happen again that many times.
Oh gosh, right. That's why most people have done it maybe once.
It is terrifying. I mean, I think that is kind of like what you hear as a kid, you're going to break your neck and you're not going to be able to walk. That's how you picture it happening pretty much.
But that, to me, watching that is not, I actually think about breaking my neck more like being face planting and bending your neck back.
Right.
This, I could imagine someone breaking their back in the middle of their back, because that's where...
the scorpion starts with face panting and
right. Oh man. What's so funny? I can't remember my high school graduation. I can't even remember any images of my high school graduation. I have a vivid picture of what happened to that guy, that poor rider on that part.
And it wasn't because you were drunk at your high school graduation or anything.
No, yeah, totally. No, I mean,
just a long time ago.
What's so bizarre? Yeah, I remember lots of things in high school. I just can't remember that event. That's what's so bizarre to me. But this one, he was a younger guy too. So I was like, man, thank goodness he's younger, because he's maybe a little more flexible.
You ever have a time in your life where you're like, I want to commit this to memory so I always remember it?
Yeah.
It's hard to do.
How do I make this a core memory? Right?
Maybe replace that guy's scorpioning.
Oh, man. Or attach it to the guy. It's like attach the new memory to that. I'm just going to make a memory chain of things attached to. Yeah, that's interesting. I'm going to try that. Speaking of riding some of the, aggressive trails, we've been riding every other week, bi-weekly, I guess it is, together. And so those have been some fantastic rides. And this last ride we went on was phenomenal.
It was a good one.
It was a good one. Yeah, still was. Yeah. So, but you did the tire pressure test with your thumb.
Did you see the reel we did of the tire pressure test on Instagram?
Not only did I see it, but Karen saw it.
Oh, that's cool.
And she was like, that was so great, So
we're getting ready for the ride, and I've got my little air compressor, and I put put some air in. I felt it. And lately I've been checking with a pressure gauge, but normally I just go to feel.
Right.
Unless I'm like practicing a specific course and trying to really dial in a tire pressure for like a race course, I normally go by feel. And I put in some air and I was like, that's a little firmer, I feel like, than I usually ride. And I was curious and I checked, it was 16 PSI in the front.
Yeah.
And that's with Cushcore. And I don't think I was wrong. I think that was kind of a little bit firmer than I usually ride in those trails with Cushcore.
Right.
And so I took a little out and I was like, that's maybe about right. Maybe a little soft, but I'm going to run it. It feels about right. I like it a little soft out here. Check the pressure. 14 and a half.
14 and a half.
Yeah.
I was thinking that's too soft. Like if we hit, something with a hard G out, like, type of feature. And
there was no point while I was actually riding the bike where I felt like it was too soft. Cushcore really does a lot to keep all the
amazing,
negatives of low tire pressure at bay. But once when we were stopped and I was just holding my front brake and I was on a weird jagged rock edge,
right,
and I saw what my front tire was doing, it kind of spooked me out because it was kind of like there was a weird crease in the sidewall.
Right. But I guess the Cushcore Pro is holding it up.
Yeah, and I think probably without the Cushcore, I bet in those conditions I'd sometimes be at like 16, 17.
Wow. Because
that other pressure feeling the 16 didn't feel super hard to me.
Right.
And I think when I'm in normal conditions with gear I'm familiar with, I think I'm usually within about it's not so much that I know what a PSI is that I know within about a PSI what feels right to me.
Right.
And like I think I can recreate it within about a PSI with a test, maybe. Or maybe I've just gotten lucky lately. But
because in the pressure test video
I was within a PSI. I wasn't the only one, and some people were even closer, but some people were really far off.
Right.
And I'm not even saying I could guess within a PSI every time, but
it does have to do with it was interesting. I forget who it was. Maybe it was Drew. Was like, check the casing.
He wanted it right
because the casing makes a big difference,
and casing and tire width makes a difference too.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, so that was I was a little bit surprised. 14 and a half PSI felt a little bit low to me.
Probably run 15 next time.
Yeah. But
I checked some other pressures around the group, and like some people were at 20.
Yeah, mine was. I think I was 20. Yeah, 20 and 22 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to creep my pressures down.
Yeah, those pressures seem to be working well for you that day.
Yeah, it was.
You were moving along, scooting out.
Yeah, it's. But let me see. I have been riding my muscle bike,
which is your trance.
My trance. Yeah. So I used to, every week, once or twice, pedal from my house, which is in Tustin, and I would pedal up to Santiago Oaks. It's about 5 or 6 miles to the park entrance, and then do a ride up there and then come home. I used to do that a whole bunch on my muscle bike, but I just found myself not doing that very often, especially because I have the annual pass now. And if you drive there, in the same amount of door-to-door time, you get an extra up and down.
Right.
And so that's been worth it to me. But you also lose about 30 minutes of just pedal time.
Right.
So in the driving and what have you.
Yeah.
So, but lately I've been pedaling from the house. I've been trying to do that, on the week, maybe once a week, maybe, if I have time. So rode on the Trance, and then I rode on the Chamois Hagar. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. That's the, pretty slacked out gravel bike.
Is there a day you're usually doing that?
Friday morning or Saturday. Yeah.
In the early morning? Early-ish?
Early-ish. Yeah. We should do that.
I might.
Awesome.
Well,
I mean,
those days are both days I do morning kid transport stuff.
Right.
But we could still do it a different day.
Yeah. Could meet at like Jamboree and Irvine Boulevard.
Totally. That's what I was picturing.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So that's been, it's been good. It's been good to get the legs back under me. Oh, I know what I was going to say too. I put the fast wheel set on the Trans. So it's like reserve 28 SLs, with cross country tires with XC Cushcore. And I was almost full race pace up shoots.
Nice. How much does that bike weigh?
Oh gosh.
Do you know?
I think it's like right around 26 pounds.
Nice. What did almost full race pace turn out to be up shoots?
And it was a shade over 9 minutes.
Sick.
It wasn't too bad.
I mean, I'd be stoked to be able to do
Yeah,
that,
I was
for sure.
I was pretty happy. But yeah, I was thinking, man, those people who PR that, or the KOMs, those guys are.
It's in the sixes, I think, or maybe.
Sixes, yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
and the women too. Like,
yeah,
pretty
wild. But riders are amazing.
Yeah,
bikes are amazing. Riders are amazing.
So yeah, no, it's been good times. Should we get a couple listener questions?
Yes, please.
All right. So MTB Alan sent us questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Alan.
Thanks, Alan. And actually, these came from last week. Let's see. So he asks, from a performance and setup perspective, how much does the air volume in a fork equate to the air volume tire wheel combo? For instance, does it make sense that you might run lower pressures in a 180 fork than in a 150 fork? I think maybe he's saying lower pressures in the tires on a 180 fork than if you had a 150 fork.
I'm not sure if I'm understanding correctly, but I think he's more saying like as the air volume goes up, do you run lower pressures the way you would in a tire? Because like as tire pressure volumes go up, you run lower pressures.
Yep.
I think part of what's a little bit maybe not quite a clear, if I'm understanding him correctly.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of a maybe misunderstanding because how do I explain it? On say a Fox 36.
Yep.
The difference between a 150 fork and a 160 fork is the length of the air shaft by 10 millimeters.
Right.
And it is not that the 160 fork has a lower air volume at the top of the travel than the 170 fork. Right. It's that it doesn't go as far in.
Right.
So intuitively, it would feel that a 180 fork maybe has a bigger volume air spring than a 160 fork. And it might, depending on which two forks you're comparing.
Right.
But if you're comparing two forks that the only difference is the air shaft, which often is the case, it's actually the opposite. Well, it's not the opposite, but it kind of plays out the opposite in that the air shaft isn't going in as far.
Right. Yeah.
So you might need more volume spacers just to even get the volume the same. Right. Or like really more the leverage rate curve or the ramp up of the air spring the same.
But does that affect air pressure?
Well, I do suspect that probably, the volume of the air spring probably does affect air pressure, but I think the volume of the air spring might not be doing what Alan might think it's doing in these cases.
Right.
Depending on which two forks you're comparing.
Right. It's not necessarily increasing or decreasing the volume of air in the fork.
Right. And again, if you're comparing two forks of the same ilk but just different air shafts, it effectively almost does the opposite because you have less travel with the same volume, which is kind of like more volume.
Right. Yeah. Right. Okay. But I was kind of wondering, is his question Does the air volume in a fork equate to air volume tire wheel combo? Makes sense. You might run lower pressures in a 180 fork than a 150 fork. Yeah. Do you run a lower pressure in it?
Again, I think it comes back to which two forks you're comparing.
Yeah, yeah.
But I would say that if both are, say, Fox 36s, which can't quite go to that range, or I think a 38 can do 150 and 180.
Totally.
If they're both Fox 38s, I think you have to run volume spacers just to be able to run something close to the same pressure, I think.
Right. To get the same sag.
When you go to less travel. When you go from 180 to 150.
Yep. You need more volume spacers.
Right.
Yep. And
if you don't add volume spacers, you might have to add air. Like you might need more air in the 150 than the 180.
Correct. Yeah. So then, So
actually, it's the opposite.
Yes, because volume spacers being the same volume spacers, you need to run a higher pressure in the 150
than the 180 if they're both the same fork. Otherwise, for sure. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Alan, for that. Let's see.
How is chain tension affected by hub drag, especially in higher engagement hubs?
Right.
I think what Alan's taught. You remember sometimes with King hubs when they needed a service, when a rider was coasting, the chain on top would start to sag.
Yeah.
I think Alan's kind of talking about
that,
like a less extreme version of that.
Right.
Maybe, I think. And I do think in that sense, higher engagement hubs do have more drag, and they do probably lower the tension of the top of the chain a little bit. I9 hubs, higher I9 hubs in particular, I feel like have more drag than GT36 Star Ratchet.
So maybe when you're charging downhill, there's slightly less chain tension too.
Yeah, and I think this is also a complicated question because there's the drag of the free hub, but there's also the drag of the bearings in the system.
Right.
Which the bearings in the system drag don't affect chain tension as much, but the drag in the free hub would a little bit.
Right.
And in an apples for apples situation, there's more drag on a higher engagement system, but not all systems are the same.
Right.
So I think you got to be careful what assumptions you make.
Right, because a 36 tooth DT Swiss versus an 18 tooth DT Swiss has same system. One has.
And I think the higher engagement one has a little more drag.
Yeah. But does that impact suspension performance because of chain tension? I don't know. I'm reading into that. So if the chain tension is like loosening on the top of the chain as the suspension moves through.
What's that product that allows the O chain? O chain,
right?
Is it like a poor man's O chain?
Right.
Maybe a little,
right?
Like I don't think enough. Probably. I think in order to give enough. So what we're talking about now, I think some riders might have a hard time following to this concept, but most rear suspensions work a little bit more freely with no chain.
Correct.
Because the tension of the chain creates some anti-squat.
Correct.
And that O-chain product separates that chain force from the suspension in theory, and allows the suspension to move better. And some pretty fast people use it. And I definitely believe that chainless can be really, really fast because of how it helps the suspension work.
Right.
And so I think for a hub to create enough slack to help, it would definitely compromise chain retention in a big way.
Right.
And not look cool.
Let's see. Another question here. If someone is using Cush Core for its damping and sidewall support and not so much for rim protection, how likely would you be to suggest using DH casing instead, especially if you could get DH casing with something like Max Terra in the Maxxis lineup?
So in alignment with the question, I would say that DH casing does reduce vibration and does kind of deaden the rebound of the tire a little bit.
Right.
Which are words that I would also say about CushCore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think the question is a good question in that sense. To me, part of the beauty of CushCore is that you get a stable tire situation with a more supple, thinner tire.
Right.
Which is good for control and good
Right.
for traction. Till it isn't. But the CushCore pretty much makes it so that point never comes.
Correct.
Unless you tear the tire.
Right.
Which leads me to my next thing, which is I think the reason in the world of CushCore, in my opinion, the world to get thicker casings is to protect against tears mostly.
Yep.
There still is, I think, some of the trails, if we were riding them at really near the edge speeds, I would run more tire pressure and maybe would run thicker casings too.
Right. Because talking to like Wade Simmons, those guys are running 28 PSI.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you have to think about like when you do a 30-foot step down and the G-forces that it creates and stuff, it's a little bit different.
Correct. It's pushing the tires to their limits as if you're running. Yeah, the forces
the
are.
big hits really are hard on low pressure.
Yeah.
And just the big moves, like the bigger. Although again, until it's bad, the low pressure is helpful because it's control. So there is a little bit of tire stability question. I feel like there's a level. I wonder if there's certain courses and levels of aggression that I could get myself to where I would want to run a downhill casing and CushCore. And I doubt I'd want to run it instead of CushCore though.
Right.
I feel like, and I think in my opinion, apples to apples, even before you benefit from the potentially thinner casing, the vibration damping and the rebound control of the air in the tire is more with CushCore than with a downhill tire, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And so there's like a lot of different reasons why I would say generally no. I would say like for me, I would say CushCore and lighter casing or CushCore and downhill casing, but not downhill casing instead of CushCore.
Right. CushCore and double down.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe. And even just different. The traction isn't great in Southern California this time of year.
Right.
Right after a rain, I'll run a little higher tire pressure. And it's partly, it's not just because I'm like seeking traction in the loose. It's also because I fold over more tires when the traction's good.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, okay. Great. Last question from Alan. Alan, thanks a lot for your questions. We really appreciate these. These are great. Best practices cable routing, front brake.
So this is my addition. We were having a conversation in the shop the other day. Every once in a while I see something in the shop. I'm like, I can't believe the Path did this. And the other day there was some cable routing I saw on a bike on the floor, and I was like, oh my gosh, like everything was in the lines were kind of more or less the right length, but everything was in everything's way. And the fork line was sort of like wrapped once around the dropper post line. Or I'm sorry, the front brake line was sort of like wrapped once around the dropper post line, almost. I kind of just was like, I want to quit. Like it was one of those like hard
no,
like for me, like nobody's perfect.
Right.
No business is perfect. No human's perfect. No organization's perfect. I feel like people like me really have to have a lot of clarity about that.
Sure.
Because otherwise we end up breaking stuff in the pursuit of perfection.
Don't sacrifice the good for the perfect.
Or don't. Yeah. And I think a lot of businesses are always chasing something better and never really doing anything repeatable and letting anyone get used to how they do things and anything.
Right.
But anyway, that's kind of a side note. In other words, I wasn't like mad at anyone or anything.
Right.
But it was like, it felt like defeat to me to see that in our store.
Yep.
And
There's
it got us to kind of talking, like, what is good cable routing?
Yeah.
Or in other words, there's the question of how short do you trim them, right? Do you trim them so that you can go a full 180 on the bars? Or do you trim them so that you can only do almost a full 180? A lot of our personal bikes, you can't do a full 180, but we try to give our customers a full 180.
Right.
Also, do you trim everything after the bars are cut and the spacer configurations set and the saddle height set, so you can actually really nail everything?
Yep.
And if you do that, we do it on post sale. But then, do you need another post sale?
Right.
Like, we got really into the all the ins and outs, right? But one thing I came away with is just a little bit more clarity on like a basic idea about what is clean cable routing in the front. And I think it's, when you know something, but then someone explains it better than you can.
Sure.
And you're like, oh yeah, that's a good way to explain it. So the gist of it is that the front brake line should be furthest forward. The loop that makes should be in front of the other loops, naturally, how it sits.
Right.
The dropper post line should be short enough that it naturally sits a little bit behind the front brake line.
Yep.
And the rear brake line should go inside of those two.
Yep.
And not balloon past them much.
Yep.
Especially if the bars are straight.
And if
if possible, maybe even just be behind them.
If you have mechanical rear derailleur, it should maybe follow the similar rule that it should be.
It should be near the
behind,
dropper post, right? Or
near the.
I'm sorry, the rear brake.
Rear brake, but a little bit behind it, maybe.
Right. A little behind it. It should be behind it.
Right.
So it should be front brake, dropper post, rear brake, and if you have a rear derailleur cable, rear derailleur, in that order from front to back is how it should line up.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of like sounds obvious, but you see a lot of bikes that aren't like that.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's kind of not. And to me, it's more like that doesn't look right.
Right.
Like, hold on, let me fix this.
Right.
I hadn't really described it that clearly before, I feel like.
Right. And if you do the, twist the bars as far as they'll go, it does make the cleanest lines.
And a lot of bikes
order.
make a lot of clatter where the lines hit each other when you move,
Right.
when you turn, or
Yeah.
when, or when you hit a bump.
Yeah. Yeah. So this helps to minimize that clatter. So yeah, those are great questions. It made me look at my own bikes. It's making me look at all the bikes around the shop.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that a show?
I think so. Thanks, Auk. Thanks, Jake. Big thanks to all our listeners, and huge thanks to the coworkers here at The Path, and huge thanks to all the riders who do business with us and support The Path. And let's all remember to love the bikes we ride.